What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Tactics Con podcast. You can find more information about the Tactics Conference at tacticscon.com. I'm your host, Stuart Amadon. I'm joined today with Wade Stotts from The Wade Show with Wade. Greatest show title ever. Hyper creative. You're going way out in front. That was good.
I'm a major self-promoter. I self-promote even in the title of the show.
You got to get it in there as much as you can. I see. It's personal branding. You got to throw it out there pretty far. Wade, you are from Texas, but now you are in Moscow, Idaho. Is that right?
Yeah. So I did most of my growing up in Arkansas, but I moved here from Texas. Yeah. I'm a Southerner up here in the not the Great White North. I guess I was gonna do a SCTV reference, but yeah, up here in the Pacific Northwest.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we're in Louisiana, and the vast majority of the listeners here are going to be Gulf South people.
Cool.
From Oklahoma, Texas, all the way over to the Florida Panhandle. So you're in
cool.
You're in strong company. Good roots.
Yeah.
I'm actually from North Louisiana. That's really close to kind of the Arkansas area. So good times. So what brought you to Moscow, Idaho?
Yeah, I think it was 2011 when I first saw an episode of Ask Doug. And I got there. I was a John Piper fan, and I saw that John mentioned Doug. Anyway, so I just watched, after I found that, I watched every single one I could find. So I found Canon and Idaho through YouTube. And so being able to I'll fast forward real quick, but now I'm able to work on YouTube for Canon, which is very cool. Cool. Yeah, so I found those videos back in the day, started reading everything I could get my hands on, and listening to sermons, listening to stuff. I even downloaded some of the old zip files before Canon Plus existed of conferences and things like that. So I'm an old head, but I was enjoying that, and I did a lot of different weird things that got me here. But when I was down in Texas, I became friends with Jake McAtee, who's from there and who works here. And so he came down to visit for Christmas one year, and he came over to our spot, or to our house where we were staying. And my wife and I we spent a whole day with him. And so he came back to our house a couple of Christmases in a row. So he became a family friend from afar, and eventually he convinced me to move up here. So
nice. So what were you doing in Texas before you relocated?
I was at Louder with Crowder, the conservative show. Yeah. So I was there for 2 years. Those years being 2019 and 2020. So pretty wild time to be a part of conservative media. And so we were there. I had a year under my belt before COVID and the Floyd riots and the election stuff that was happening there. So we just went all in there. There was a whole month where we did 2 shows a day. So we went wild on
holy smokes.
Yeah. And each of those being like an hour and a half. It was crazy. You
were working like production? Is that where you kind of got your hands dirty?
Yeah. So I came in as the sound guy, and that was my in, and then I got to do more creative work after that. So for 2020, I was head of creative there, and we got to do a lot of really fun sketches. And I remember back then that I was in November of 2020. I remember I was one of the only guys able to write jokes about the sort of like the ice coolers full of ballots that were going into convention centers. And I was like, I can't believe I'm like, out of all the comedy writers in the world, nobody else wants to touch, like, this is a subject nobody else can touch. But we had fun with it.
Yeah. Heck yeah. And so now you have the Wade Show with Wade. So how did that come about? So did you relocate to launch a show? Was that a part of the original plan, or were you relocating just to change jobs, change locations?
Yeah. Well, not the original plan. We came up for lots of reasons, including schools for the kids. And my oldest was getting to school age, and we knew that we were needing to figure stuff out there. And the church and the community, and a lot of the reasons other people move. But when I got here, I was 2 years just working behind the scenes here, which was exactly what it was I needed to do. And it was tons of fun. Like I said, to come in and try to help out with YouTube presence, for a place that I had first heard about there, because I knew what the upside was for when people find good stuff on YouTube. Because I remember when I was first watching those Ask Dougs, I just remember thinking like there's more insight per word or insight per minute than I think I've ever heard. And so there was
Yeah.
just something really compelling about what was going on up here. So I'd known that for a long time, and then being able to just put my spin on it, get myself involved. Hopefully not ruin it too much, not ruin the thing that I loved too much.
Classic fear of failure, man. Chases all
Yeah.
of us around. I know exactly what you're talking about. So, so you're there for a couple of years. You're working in primarily sound design. Is that right? Audio mastering?
So here I was in like YouTube strategy. So a lot of
Oh,
the
okay.
that was we when I got here, we were doing everything was going onto one YouTube channel, and so we split that out to where now we have Blog and Blog channel, so folks can follow that specific avenue, and the Canon Press channel has its own identity. So yeah, just kind of YouTube strategy and marketing, basically content marketing, kind of trying to get folks. Like I said, I know what it means to somebody to get insight and then realize, oh wow, I got way more value out of that YouTube video than I usually get here, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
good for people knowing about us and getting involved in a deeper way.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what prompted you starting your own show?
Well, I enjoyed what I was able to do at the Crowder Show and being able to do jokes about the news and get involved with stuff there. I pitched this show. We started it in 2023, so like I said, two years after we did it. So I got here in February of 2021. February 2023, we launched the show, and it's my attempt to try to do at least you could call it like a right wing version of John Oliver or John Stewart kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a Christian kind of approach. But the difference mainly being that John Oliver and John Stewart and those guys are just trying to set everybody back to the cultural neutral. So everything
Yes.
that they do
Yes.
is trying to make sure that you just by the end of it you think, oh, this is all common sense. Oh, this is all. But really, what they're doing is subbing in the like leftist narrative about events as common sense. And so they have a kind of I don't want to say they have it easy, they have, but what they have a different kind of task, which is to set
Yeah.
people to their preferred what the entire culture is already telling them with jokes. So kind of policing the edges, like making sure that nobody gets outside the lines,
Yeah.
but doing that in a way that's funny and memorable. And I admire the skill and stuff that's over there. But I mean, like a general would admire an opposing general, be like, wow, that was creative.
Right. Well, that was a good
Yeah.
tactic. Yeah, I mean, wasn't that Napoleon
Yeah.
Bonaparte? They didn't want to shoot at him when he was
Yeah.
riding away because they had such respect for him. Like, yeah, I see that. I
Yeah. Yeah.
totally see that. So you see yourself as the pushback. You're trying to similar tactics, but you're pushing specifically towards Christianity, conservative Christianity. Am I tracking with you correctly?
Sure. The perspective is that for sure, and the way in which this kind of the channel has evolved is that I've got stuff sometimes where I'm addressing particular news topics, and other times that are more like agenda setting or like re-education or like just talking about political thinkers that have been neglected, that
Hmm.
I've gained a lot of value from. So that's been the kind of dual way of doing it, and again, hopefully doing it in a way that's funny and that those are my main influences. My main like ways of thinking about this have been where can I have fun with this? Where's the fun in this topic?
Yeah.
And if something doesn't meet that criterion, or if I can't find a clear target and I'm not interested, then that kind of topic just I get to skip it, which is great. I get to be more selective.
Yeah. So then you don't necessarily have a weekly show. You're more kind of looking for good targets to really take a swing at. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I do it every week, but
Okay.
I do one monologue a week and one podcast every week. And the podcast is available at canonplus.com. Check out
Yeah, the Wadecast with
joincanonplus.com
Wade.
for more info. Yeah, that's right. So I got the Wade Show with Wade. Those are my monologues, and then the Wadecast. which we have a lot of fun there too. And those can also be deep dives. So my influences are like late night television. And so the halves of that
Mm,
show typically are like comedy up front, usually topical, and then interviews in the back end. So
mm.
those interviews would be sometimes with comedians, sometimes with authors, and sometimes with world figures. Like Craig Ferguson had a famous interview with Desmond Tutu, and it's like he's way out of his depth, but really it was a good conversation. So anyway, that's kind of my thing. I'm just kind of yeah. I try to replicate at least what was interesting to me or entertaining about those things to me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate political engagement is so foreign in the world of Christianity right now. I appreciate your endeavor in order to move more and more in that direction. Like, what has brought you to the point? What got you to the point where you were saying like, we have got to do this. We have got to get engaged better, and this is how I'm going to do it. How'd you get there?
Yeah. The Being involved in politics, I was somewhat interested in politics in high school, college, stuff like that. So I'd follow it. Um, and I think that I was involved at I think that the times have become more, it's been clear that the times have changed since then. So we at least, even if back then it was a pitched battle, we didn't see it that way. It was at least
Mm,
disguised. So I
mm-hmm.
think that the reason I'm doing it, I would love, I've said this before, but I would love to be able to write just like silly sketches for Saturday Night Live or whatever. And like live in a time where writing silly sketches was something that made sense. At some level, it's the times. So
Mm,
when you're in kind
mm,
of this age of all out war where where everything is a battle, you can't go anywhere without somebody pushing you or like
mm,
shoving you and trying to make you go in some direction.
mm,
It's kind of inevitable that all the particulars that pop up are going to be charged as well.
mm,
And you may not like that. You may not enjoy living in those times, but it's a reality that we kind of have to reckon with. So I'm not anti. If somebody wants to do comedy that's not inherently political or do videos that are about different topics, I totally get that because people are interested in different things. But there's in doing jokes, like in trying to find fun, you're always going to have a target as well. So,
mm,
like I said,
mm.
I look for topics and I try to figure out where the fun is. But usually that means making fun of somebody, and it means that somebody's
Yeah.
I. And so, like, I did a video about the recent Hurricane Helene and the response, and there's obviously no like aiming the stuff in the direction of the victims of the hurricane is obviously the wrong choice. But like
Sure.
the response to the hurricane is the thing that there's plenty of material there to
Yeah.
criticize and make fun of. And so hopefully being able to ride that line of uh, being able to be funny, entertaining, and also like get people up to date to what's happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit of the choice of comedy, right? So you made a
Okay.
lot of references to the late night guys who wield comedy as a mechanism to bring people back to what they would recognize as cultural neutral. Okay. Do you see Christians being able to do the same thing right now?
Well, definitely not. So the with
Yeah.
if we lived in a Christian culture, then I can see it making sense for somebody to brand themselves as the Christian
Right.
John Stewart or whatever,
Right.
because again, John Stewart was reinforcing the political narrative, and that's just it's a different view of people always call like John Stewart propaganda, or people call the late night guys they're doing propaganda, and propaganda by its nature is enforcing the narrative of the regime. And so we can't do propaganda because we're not the regime. And
Right.
we anything that we do is not going to function in the same way. And so
Mm,
as I'm doing this and mimicking at some level the presentation style or the rhythms and again comic influences of these mostly left wing guys,
right.
um, I can tell that I have a different project and try to develop that. So it's fun to feel like at some level because you know that um, people are tempted to think that they could just come in and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to do the Christian version of Jon Stewart and act like it's all common sense, or act like it's all act like do the same kind of thing. I'll act like I'm enforcing the regime narrative, but you don't have a regime behind you that's
Right.
also building this edifice. So it's a different kind of work than the left is doing, but it is an actual confrontation with them. So many attempts that are just trying to emulate can sometimes cut themselves off or be less effective because they don't recognize that their task is different.
Right. So how do you find your way around that? Like how do you that? You know?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that has been through, like I said, finding political thinkers and Christian thinkers that have been neglected, and be able to pull up essays from Murray Rothbard and from Sam Francis and from Carl Schmitt and G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis. I've done videos that are more here's the way things really are. And that's not the kind of thing that you would expect to see on Jon Stewart, because Jon Stewart doesn't ever want you to think that he has a perspective, and that his perspective is just the one that's obvious to everyone.
Yeah.
But justify at some level, the Christians, and the outsiders have to justify and have to get people on the same page in a different way. So
you
battles,
actually had to put you had to put more effort forward. You're trying to not just reestablish cultural neutral, right? You're actually trying to convince people that what you're saying is true. So you have to, in your comedy, you're not just making fun of something, but it's almost like you have to establish the argument and then build out from there and then make fun of it, right? Like then bring them back into the funny part.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly different. I hesitate to call it like harder, mainly because the targets for humor on this side are like I said earlier, we have targets that nobody else can mention. Like the igloo coolers full of ballots, nobody else can make fun of that, and it's a ridiculous image. And I got
and
to
get to
write sketches about it. Yeah, yeah. So at some level, my job's easier because they have to constantly turn off their brain and like when they're looking at something obviously absurd. So yeah, like I said, I don't think it's easier, but it's certainly different.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So you've got the Wade Show. It seems to be growing in popularity. My kids literally get the news from your show. Just so you know this. So I can't remember what it was, but I was talking to my kids about something that was going on in the world. And I was like, kids, y'all remember back in the day, it was before your show came on, whenever such and such happened in England. I can't remember maybe it was Brexit or something like that. And they said,
"Oh, sure,
Dad,
yeah.
we don't know about that because that wasn't on the Wade Show." And I was like, oh, wow.
The dark times before the Wade Show.
The pre-Wade times. So I I really do appreciate everything that you're doing. My kids love your stuff. It's very helpful for us.
I'm glad.
What do you see as your big goal here? Like, if you were to be able to, I don't know, somebody hands you a $10 million check and says, "I want to fund the Wade Show to your wildest dreams." Like, what would you be accomplishing? Where would you be heading with something like that?
Well, I think the core of it, I think, is there, so the monologues themselves, I've tried to make it as much of, if as the Wade Show grows and as it changes, I want the monologue to be like the seed form of anything that comes afterwards. So being able to engage with stuff and do it in an entertaining way, so that people don't feel like, if they're watching the news, I don't want people to feel like, or they're watching my show, I don't want people to feel like it's their vitamins, or they've got to force down their brand cereal. So
that's working. My kids don't feel like that. They're into it. We watch the stuff as a family. Every now and then I'll look over and my wife is laughing quietly to herself as we're going to sleep, and she's watching your stuff. So it's working. What you're doing is working.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, my goal is entertainment, and that's the thrust of it. Any kind of work or research or trying to figure that out is just me trying to find something to talk about, trying to find something to joke about, and it might as well be something that is relevant to people. That was always the thought with like late night shows, even when they were less overtly partisan. Late night shows, they had shows every day. So if you're going to be filling up comedy every single day, then your jokes are going to have to be topical because you can't come up with, a new observation about toothpaste every single night. It's not going to be Jerry Seinfeld. Like
Right.
it's just a lot. It's a
Right.
lot of observational comedy. And there's one guy in particular who tried to do that more, but it just didn't work. The well runs dry really quickly.
Right.
So the topical thing was a necessity there, and that is again a huge portion of my influence was David Letterman and Conan O'Brien, especially. But the topical stuff was, again, just a vehicle to try to be entertaining.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so, like I said, I recognize I live in different times now, so I can't do exactly what Conan did or what Letterman did.
Sure.
And but I'm thankful, honestly, to live in a time where I can do this kind of thing, and It's not just not that doing a public access show wouldn't be a good thing. Like doing a public access show could be a great thing, but back in the day, if I were doing this same kind of thing, it would have a much smaller venue, and fewer people could see it. I couldn't share it with folks. So I'm very thankful for YouTube and for Canon Plus for the opportunity to share my dumb little jokes,
Well, they seem to be doing
force
pretty
them
well.
on the world.
Um, one of the things that I think that seems to be a recurring theme in what you're saying is the amount of prep and reading and study it seems to go into a show. Like, how long would you say it typically takes you to prep for one of your monologues?
Well, I do. I should keep track of it, but I feel like if I were to write down like starting this hour, I was researching stuff. It would all sometimes the filtering is the main thing. So I feel like at the
Mm.
end of it, my spreadsheet would look really strange. But being able to filter and know what just rings and go, just sings and go like, oh, I have to talk about that. That's an of course kind of
Yeah.
topic. So sometimes it's really easy. Like when something crazy topical happens, I knew, for example, the week that like the attempt on Trump's life happened, I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to talk about. That's easy. So usually, yeah, the filtering process of just looking at the news and knowing what has some grab to it.
Mm.
That's a big part of it. But yeah, the prep stuff, like I said, is just what I try to do first is make it interesting and then make it funny. So that's my process. So sometimes while I'm trying to make it interesting, I'll think of like, oh, here's an angle on that. Here's a joke there. But being able to make something that is would work on its own, but by the end of it, you might be depressed, or you might then that's my first goal. And then the second goal is to take away the sting of that first part. So get some
Say
of the
what's
bitter out.
Yeah, yeah. Are you writing everything yourself?
Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
and
So
so
you
it being once a week. If there are folks who are like, I wish this were happening every day. I was just thinking, and my thought is always like, it's the Wade Show with Wade because the limits of the show are Wade's limits. So I'll do my very best. It may be sad that I can put together like one, maybe two of these a week, but yeah, that's maybe the best I can do.
well,
We'll
I mean
see. We'll see what happens in the future.
that's pretty impressive right there. It seems like and you're wearing many hats, right? You're still doing things inside of Canon. You're doing
Yeah,
your show and producing that. So you've got a lot of stuff going on. You probably are pretty maxed out already as it is.
I'm able to help out with some cool stuff that we do around here. Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun team to be a part of. Just
Mm,
because, like I said, I've benefited from it so much that
yeah,
I'm happy to be involved at whatever level I can be.
that's awesome. So let's talk about this a little bit. So we've talked about comedy as, the weapon that we can wield. One of the things that I've found though is that Christians, if you as a Christian make fun of something, there's plenty of Christians in the world who say, "How dare you? Why would this is not the way a Christian should act." I've heard that
Sure.
so many times. Um,
Yeah.
what's your response to people like that who say, "No, no, no, Christians, we don't make fun of people. That's not biblical."
Right. Yeah, I at one level I get it. I think it's mostly a habit of mind of people where
Mm.
people see those people and think that this person is just trying to be cruel for its own sake, and there are people who are doing
Uh,
that, who are
sure,
just like
sure.
as a defense mechanism or some kind of thing that's built up over years. People just get used to, oh, I know what that guy, I know that guy is just angry and taking it out on people. So
Mm.
those people exist, but I'll tell a quick story. A few weeks back, after the DNC, so the DNC happened, and one of the speakers was FDR's grandson. And if you Google FDR's grandson, he's a weird looking guy. And I hope that any Christians in the audience don't get offended by me my just saying that. But as I was looking at it, I was trying to figure out what he looked like, and I put a joke in the show that I forget what the exact wording was, but it's to the effect that he looks like someone drew a face on a skin tag. So that was my take on this guy. Um, and it wasn't a huge, so a lot of people like that joke, but it wasn't a huge negative response, but there were a handful of folks who just said like, oh, you're better than that. Why make fun of the way he looks? There are plenty of other things to make fun of. And I was like, my number one thought was like, these are the worst people in the world. Like these are people
Right.
who like are like everything you hate that the Democrats want to do,
Yeah.
like unmentionable evil stuff. And I'm taking, yes, a shot at this guy. And some folks will take that as like oh, that's an ad hominem. But I'm not making an argument about the guy. I'm just like saying he looks weird, and making an observation. So, which I think is fair game. So it's all about the direction, and it's all about what you're doing and why you're trying to do it. And so
Mm.
if somebody could see that, and if I were just making fun of some helpless guy on the street who and calling him all sorts of names or making fun of how he looked, then or just a random guy who didn't do anything bad to me, like
Hmm.
that would
Hmm.
be evil. Like that would be just there'd be something wrong with my heart if I were just trying to take people down a notch. To make myself feel better or whatever it was, whatever it would
Sure.
be.
Sure.
But like, you have to recognize, okay, I have a legitimate target here, and I'm not saying it's not that anything I could say would be justifiable. I'm not defending total. I'm not saying that it's like totally morally okay to do whatever I can to this guy.
Hmm.
But there were, yeah, and if anybody wants theological grounding for that, there's a great book called The Serrated Edge by Doug Wilson. Again, canonplus.com has the audiobook, and you can listen to CEO Brian Cole read it to you. So, yeah,
So
he provides and he's been answering these questions. Pastor Wilson's been answering these questions a lot longer than I have, and in my own writing and my own like caring about comedy, his books and also his stuff in Rules for Reformers was super helpful for
mm,
knowing. Oh, there are guardrails. I've got all, and being able to have all those guardrails in mind makes me less nervous about a handful of decisions. So people could argue about particulars, and I'd be happy to talk about those. But the general critique that you shouldn't say something bad about somebody else, that doesn't land. And that's not me being prideful about it. It's just like I'm sorry, you must have missed something, uh, including the work of Doug Wilson and Serrated Edge. So everybody should read
yeah.
that book.
Yeah, that's a good book, man. That's helpful. It was helpful. I think I read it when it was still a blog. I think is whenever I
Oh,
picked
okay,
that stuff up,
nice.
or at least blogs about it. But that was helpful for around the time whenever, around when I discovered Idaho Canon, Cross Politic Guys, time of 2020, when all the nonsense was going down. I remember talking to my wife, and I was just like, "Hey, I know that nobody really likes anybody from Moscow, Idaho,
Yeah,
but they're the only ones that
sure.
make any sense right now. So we're just gonna listen
Yeah,
and try to see what happens." So yeah, I think that's
right.
great. So
Yeah,
let's think
yeah. I
about
mean,
this. Oh yeah.
there's a sense. I'm not. Yeah, I'd like to just clarify. I'm not. I wouldn't. Like I said, wouldn't argue for total moral blank check, whatever
Right.
you say about the bad guys. But
Right.
if a bad guy is coming in and or like people are trying to steal from you in order to like mutilate children, then like and like it's okay for me to make fun of the guy's hat. It's like, oh, you have
Right.
a funny hat on. That's not the worst. It's not. Basically, some folks are doing that again out of like temperamental. Oh, I wouldn't ever do that. It's not my temperament. And
Hmm.
other folks are just trying to say that any resistance at all to tyranny or to bad guys is bad. And I just don't agree. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that Christians have been hamstrung by this weird definition of the word nice. We Christians have to be
Yeah, sure.
nice. We can only ever speak positive and encouraging things. And so they don't realize that that's so deeply ingrained inside of them and in their DNA that they aren't getting the times to wage war with your words and with your actions correctly from the scriptures. And so when you suggest now is the time to fight, it's the
Mm,
pacifists. It's kind of like we're going back to the 1930s and 1920s pacifism movement that was going throughout the world
sure.
that hamstrung so many nations, and I would argue is one of the major reasons that World War II got to the place that it did,
Mm,
because we just are not engaging in the culture war properly because we're obsessed with being the nice guys. We don't have categories for
right,
the right
right.
time to wage war and wage it well. And yeah, Serrated Edge, Rules for Reformers, those are great books for people to take a look at if they
Yeah,
want to read more on those topics. Um,
yeah.
Having said
And
that,
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you again. But
no, go ahead.
if you have beef with me talking about a guy looking like a skin tag, you might want to check out like some of the stuff that Martin Luther did back in the day. Talking about papists, talking about the
Right,
papists. He
right,
was a little not so. If my hope is I think Martin Luther missed quite a bit of stuff. But
sure.
if you have a beef with me and Martin Luther, I think we're going to be okay. We can still talk it out.
Yeah,
We
we
can
can
talk
still
it out.
we can make it through. Have you ever found the Martin Luther insult generator on the internet? Did you ever find that?
Oh no, no. What's
No,
this?
it's a wonderful thing. Just Google it, Martin Luther insult
Okay.
generator, and you just
I'm
click the
scared.
button
Is
and
it
it.
like, do you put your name in or like what I'm
Oh
scared of
no!
is like you upload a picture. You upload a picture of yourself and then Martin Luther just roasts you.
he, just, he just freestyles on you for the next. No, it's not quite that. It's just
Yeah.
it pulls
Or
random insults out of his
oh,
writing
okay. Yeah.
as you kind of click the
I thought
generate.
Martin Luther from the dead would like know all my sins and just like making fun of how terrible I am. You're like, oh
Well,
no, great point. Great point.
I mean, people got AI going now, so I suppose we're not too far away from a completely customized
Yeah.
entity like that. Oh man.
No.
Okay, so one last thing I want to think through with you in the sense of Christians engaging more in the culture war, engaging more
Mhm.
in the political side of things, learning when to wage war and when to wage it appropriately. What do you think is the next big domino to fall for Christians to engage effectively in the political sphere? Because this is let me set you up a little bit here. I've found
Sure.
that we are woefully absent, and we have been for a long time. And then when we do get engaged politically, we think that that means simply just like voting or
Sure. Yeah.
not really being able to articulate or provide commentary on the issues that are going around, like very, very surface level, two-dimensional type engagement. And obviously, I think that's failed us. What do you think the trajectory for the future of Christian political engagement looks like? What is it? How do we get there?
Yeah.
What's the next domino to fall? How do we pull this off?
Right. Yeah, I think that we can get really obsessed with national politics because that's what's served up to us
Mm-hmm.
as the circus, and I think that's a mistake for lots of reasons. But
Yes.
we're seeing this with the Helene response. So, and I'm sure we'll see this with the future storms that are looking like they're going to be nasty.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of folks who had had some level of trust left in the institutions of the federal government. That FEMA is going to at least do some work, or at least going to be even if they're not leading the way, they have the biggest wad of cash to throw at it. So surely at some point they're going to help. But the response has been really not great. But the response from private organizations and from local people, folks who just have helicopters who are like helicoptering people out, that's an illustration of we
Mm-hmm.
we shouldn't necessarily expect a government that has given us every reason to think that they hate us to save us when we're in trouble. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we've seen in a concrete way now, but because it's an acute pain, it makes all of that very clear. But when it's more chronic, when it's a little slower, and there's not some kind of obvious natural disaster, it's easy to think that, well, if something really bad were to happen, then the feds would come in, sweep up all the mess. But it doesn't happen, especially if you're not part of a politically favored group, which like a bunch of rural Southerners evidently aren't. It's sad. It's sad to see that. But I think that what we're going to see, that any kind of movement going forward is going to have to be something that reinforces these bonds, these local bonds, reinforces affection for the people that are directly around you. It's really we've heard this for a long time about the left, that the left has an abstract love for humanity, and whereas it seems like the right should be able to develop a healthy love for the people that are directly in front of you. So, and a lot of times, I forget who said this, but a love for humanity is typically a mask for hating people. And that shows up. It shows up in policy. So I think that local engagement, but not just local engagement, but local like strengthening of bonds and community, is where the real action is. Because if the federal government continues on its current path, well, I pray that it doesn't, but if the federal government continues on its path, or if it doesn't, so whether it does or not, the best thing that we can do going forward is to have loyalty and have tight-knit communities who care about each other in practical ways. So we're seeing that happen. It's still there. It exists. And that's an encouraging thing to see. Sad that a tragedy had to happen for such a clear illustration
Sure.
to
Sure.
come to us and for us to realize it. But
Right.
it is there, and nurturing those things, I think, will be the way forward for Christians. I think that any kind of commentary engagement, shifting to commentary, I think that the way that Christians have to be going forward in commentary is at some level, and I'm trying to contribute to this, less self-serious. So like we talked earlier about like comedy as a weapon, and I agree with that,
Hmm.
and I think that's true. But so comedy can be a serious business and accomplish good, serious things. But the worst kind of comedy, the worst, is self-serious comedy. So comedy that
Okay.
thinks that what it's doing, it just thinks of itself constantly as the most important thing that's happening in the world.
Mm.
And that's one thing that really bothers us about the left. So we see it when the left does it. It's very clear to us when
Yeah.
Stephen Colbert thinks that what he's doing is saving the world, or John Oliver. John Oliver's the worst about this. He gets super self-serious about he's going to
Yes.
be the guy who fixes the problems with corn farming or whatever, or corn subsidies. And you're like,
Yeah.
you're not. You're just not. You're just going to like you might succeed at making HBO viewers sad about corn for half an hour, but like that's not the same thing as saving the world. So
Yeah.
like that like I think that distinction, we should be able to see that with ourselves doing it. So if we're
Mhm.
again, and not just people who are trying to do comedy, but people generally involved in politics, many of them, yeah, can lose the sense that like, hey, we're supposed to be having fun here. Like there's you can do this kind of stuff with a smile.
Yeah.
Whatever you think about like the old Top Gun movie, there's a great the reason people love that movie, and the reason it like caused a bunch of like a surge in signups to the military is because it looked fun. There were guys joking around in like making crude jokes, whatever, but like joking around, having fun while doing serious business, doing like stuff that later on you might get a medal for it, and you might stand in a ceremony and everybody's singing a song and giving speeches about how cool you are. But at the time, you're having fun and you're accomplishing
Yeah.
something at the same time. So I think that if anybody in those, it could get, obviously there are times to buckle down and get focused on stuff, but
Sure.
it wasn't I'll pretend that Top Gun is real, but there like the times in Top Gun where they're sitting around joking around, that isn't distracting them from the purpose that they're doing. It's not comic
Yeah.
relief. It's not we're doing something serious here and then somebody makes a wisecrack and everybody goes boo, like it really is part of the process. It's part of the thing. And
They
so
enjoy what they
like
do.
if
They
yeah,
genuinely
absolutely. And
enjoy what
like
they do. They're having a good time.
yeah, the joy of battle. Like one of my heroes is Jeb Stuart, who was known as like a super like flamboyant guy who would do stuff just to make the other side mad. and like pulled pranks. He would like there was a particular instance where the first orders that Jeb Stuart got from Robert E. Lee. So Robert E. Lee just gotten promoted, um, and so his predecessor was wounded. I believe is wounded. Robert E. Lee gets promoted, gives his first orders to Jeb Stuart. Says, "I think he has a suspicion about the location of the enemy troops, McClellan's army." He says, "I think that they're too spread out and not in a formation right now. So will you go check on that?" And so Jeb Stuart says, "Yes, of course. What if while I'm there, I do a full ride around with all of my cavalrymen?" So he has 1,200 cavalrymen. So 1,200 guys riding around in a circle around this army, literal, like riding circles around it, literally.
Okay.
And then I'll come back. And so Lee says he doesn't give exact approval. So we have the like transcripts of this stuff. So he doesn't give exact approval, but he does. He does say he doesn't say no in a harsh way. So he doesn't say yes for sure, and he doesn't say no exactly. But he does say main thing though, make sure you know where the troops are. I just need that information. But if you want to do that thing, you make that call. So anyway, so he does it. He gets all the way around. He like gets the information, then does the circle. While he's heading back, I'll expand the story just for color. While he's heading back, they get to a river. The river, there was a bridge there, so that they're expecting to see this bridge. When they get to the bridge where the bridge is supposed to be, it's gone. It's totally torn down. Somebody either got messed up in battle or just decayed over time or something. So they get there and they just sit. They're like, what are we going to do? McClellan's army knows by this point that Jeb's cavalry is after them, or has just like embarrassed them by riding a circle around them. They get to this river, and then somebody notices an old, decayed, abandoned barn. So what they do is they build a bridge out of the like old, terrible wood from this barn, and as they're building it, they're like singing songs to each other. And then so they slowly start walking people across. They get horses to swim while they walk across, or they ride across. So they get to the end. They make the entire bridge. They get everybody across, 1,200 guys, and then they light fire to the bridge. And so as they're lighting fire, this bridge that they just built out of this terrible barn, up in flames. It's just like the flames are licking the bridge, and then they see 1 to 2 of McClellan's troops come in, and they're like, so there are like 2 Southern guys who are there to guard the bridge, and they see a couple of guys from the north across the other side. Anyway, so the Southern guys bolt, and and they get a couple shots off. So the Northerners get a couple of shots off, miss them, and then they're stuck. So the enemy is stuck on the other side of the bridge. Anyway, I told that whole story to say like it's fun. Like we can actually accomplish stuff and have a good time.
And
it
enjoy.
doesn't have to be a funeral all the time. Yeah, it's not
Right.
not everything we do has to be solemn and funereal.
I think that's a great point. Yes. So I agree. I
Didn't
think
expect
that we
to use
can.
the word funereal, number one. I wasn't expecting to use the word funereal or to tell a long story about Jeb Stuart, but here we are.
Hey, we made it. It was good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we
No, I
did.
think that
Yeah.
brings up a clear point that we've got to, if we're going to do this well, we need to enjoy the work, right? Like if
Yeah.
we are instead simply sitting back and trying to be so self-serious all the time, that grates on you. It grates on your team. You need, so if you're a leader and you have a team of people with you, you need to be jovial and joyful and a little rowdy. Yes, that's important too. But if you're missing out on the fun of the work that you do, you're going to run out of steam. I've seen plenty of people. So we've owned a marketing agency for almost 10 years now. I think it might have been 10 years actually. But I've seen plenty of people who will work in this industry for way less money simply because you enjoy what you're doing, you're having fun while you're doing it. Like you're a part of a team where you share similar values, you're on a common mission together, you know the trajectory that you're moving together. That's a big deal. and the guys
Mhm.
who don't want to go work for somebody who is slower, who is so self-serious all the time. Every meeting is a drag. It's a total different animal, and I think it has a lot to do with the Christian mission too. To have the joy or to know the joy of what you do and how it matters to the world, and to maintain that attitude and disposition as you continue to advance the gospel forward. I think that's huge. I think that's a great deal. So yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Find ways to enjoy what you do. That's great. I think that's a great
Yeah.
thing.
And
Well,
everybody
Wade,
should love Jeb Stuart. I'm sorry to take a strong, weird stance on your podcast, but Jeb Stuart is the best.
hey, you know what? I'm going to
Yeah.
go read more about him as soon as we're done here
There
today.
we
So
go.
I'm excited about that.
I believe I speak for this podcast when saying that. No, it was good.
You are the official. Wade is the official Jeb Stuart endorser
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
Tactics Con
Comments.
podcast.
Yeah. Comments made by Wade do not represent. I want to be clear. Do not represent the stance of this podcast.
Wade, thanks a ton, man. I really appreciate you taking
Yeah. Thank
you
you.
got a ton of stuff going on. Thank you for taking time out of your day to do this. I know that everybody's going to be encouraged and learn more about Jeb Stuart and
Yeah.
funerality, funeral. I can't remember what the word was. It'll be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. There we go. Well, thank you
Well,
for
thank
having
you.
me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it was great. I appreciate you guys. You can go to tacticscon.com to find our podcast, YouTube channel, or to buy tickets to Tactics 2025. Make sharp your swords. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see y'all next time.